was a story of more woe. He cut open his late son's chest and took his blood-stained hand to the lips, thus proclaiming that their hatred towards the late had been satisfied, and so that they didn't worry about the consequences, because he himself was the murderer of his son and should be held responsible for everything. An archival crime story, a touching love novel, and a little encyclopedia of Kazakh life of the first part of the 19th century. The novel Bikei and Maulyana, or to be more precise, a documentary novel. Most of the people mentioned in the novel were familiar to Dal, with the exception of the main characters. Bikei, a true batyr, brave, independent and principled. Beauty Maulyana matched him up well, as she was bold, dexterous and bright. The entire event was narrated as it happened, and it unfolded in precise detail as it was relayed, the writer says. He was delighted at the remarkable story of Bikei and Maulyana, which described a story of two young characters, the beautiful Bikei and Maulyana. This was a dramatic and tragic story based on real events.
Так вот, она была написана на основании реальных обстоятельств.
Chapter 1. Shakespearean Passions. A tragedy struck in 1831. Bikei, the younger son of a wealthy Orenburg Kazakh Isengildi Jan Murzin, had been killed in early September. Among the suspects were Bikei's father and his two older brothers. That was a story worthy of being penned by Shakespeare himself. In fact, some of its episodes were deliberately downplayed by Dal. In reality, everything was much more powerful and brighter. This is borne out by the case materials kept at Orenburg archive. We have discovered archive records in which this story was reflected in official documents. A whole body of documents has been preserved, and this pile of papers characterizes that epoch. Jan Murzin was a highly esteemed Kazakh figure and the head of a big family, and then the tragedy occurred. In a family row, he killed his son. This is a report and investigation of that incident. The Orenburg administration had to look into this in a mandatory manner. It is known that Dal showed an interest in the records of Bikei and Maulyana in his private capacity. In other words, he questioned witnesses, even though the court case had been settled by then. But let us proceed in the proper order. Vladimir Ivanovich held a post of an official for special assignments attached to the Orenburg governor Perovsky. His assignments were special indeed. For instance, duty-bound and under personal order of his immediate seniors, he was tasked to learn the local way of life and the steppe traditions. He also studied the Kazakh language. He had to immerse himself in all the cases which the military governor had to uncover. Among them were issues relating to the Kyrgyz governance of the small, the middle and the internal horde. In his dutiful capacity, he closely interacted with the Kazakhs. He was held in high esteem and authority among the Kazakhs. Even during the uprising headed by Satay Taymanov and Mahomet Utimisov, they wanted to see Vladimir Ivanovich Dal as a negotiator from the Russian side. They used to say that he's knowledgeable about the Kazakh mentality. Dal arrived in Orenburg 2 years later after the murder in 1833 and got down to writing the novel straight away, because he was so astonished by the novel about Bikei and Maulyana. Everyone has still been talking about this. 3 years later, the novel was printed, and this time around it astounded a different group of the audience. The novel was critically acclaimed by Pushkin, Zhukovsky. Meanwhile, the Cossack writer Lugansky, as this was Dal's pseudonym, became a well-known portrait of ordinary life. But in any case, how did he manage to learn the traditions which had been unfathomable to him and get tuned into the beat of these customs with such respect? It is important to know that in a Kyrgyz family, every man needs to get a cradle for every newborn child. This cradle is made of curved twigs and fits a small doll bed. In fact, if a baby dies, the cradle is then overthrown onto their grave and stays there forever. To make a cradle means to be independent, have a wife and a home. He was able to appreciate the subtlety of traditions and customs. He was a very inquisitive and friendly person. That is why he had an interest in the peculiarities of Kazakh way of living. The person who had come from a different place was naturally interested in the aspects of life that were unfamiliar to him. The novel Bikei and Maulyana is not simply a work of fiction which told the event that had happened. This was the first time when Kazakh reality was described in literature. For instance, a person who has reached a village is considered to be a guest and can't be sure of their security. Vladimir Dal wrote. However, Vladimir Ivanovich had a lot of sketching about the steppe life. Chapter 2: Love and Death. This child handles the horse very well, but so far he hasn't taken part in the races. He's confident about his strength, but his age didn't let him in. Surely next year he will cover the distance. These horses cover a distance ranging from 30 to 50 milestones, Dal wrote. In such a distance, the races cover a stretch of over 1 kilometer in just 1.5 minutes, though sometimes they manage within a minute and 20 seconds. Bikei was one of the most successful riders. The most difficult one is Alaman Baiga. This is the longest distance. Horses don't run themselves out, just the most resilient ones will get to the finish line. They are the most enduring and the fast animals. But Bikei and Maulyana met during a different national game called Kızku, which means to catch a girl. Destiny bestowed the heart and the mind on these two extraordinary people. Their bodies were so beautiful, they could be worthy of a royal couple, Dal writes. Bikei raced after the invincible, who no one else dared chasing. Everyone knew a hawk-nosed horse of hers. Everyone knew that she wouldn't spare the shoulder or the head of her opponent, and that she would use her roller whip to swish that who slipped up and didn't catch her. Everyone also knew that since she became puberty, not a single person had been able to catch her and hug her in the games or the feasts. He came up with her and embraced her, and their destiny was solved. Even though it seemed that the whole world was against them, Bikei had a bride who had been matched up with him in childhood, and a share of the bride money had been paid. Maulyana also had been promised as a wife to Bikei's elder brother, Jean Kuchuk, but they defied everything for the sake of love. Bikei returned the bride money and married Maulyana. They had lived happily for 2 years, but they both were like strangers in this world, as if they were too good for it. Dal saw something absolutely different. He saw human tragedy, and he described it with all the talent he had. He heard it from Sultan Kusap, who was the husband of Bikei's sister. He narrated it all based on his impressions.
Султана Кусяпа, который был мужем сестры Бикея.
He was his friend, and this is reflected in the novel. There was another affair concerning justice, and Bikei couldn't forget it. His Engildi Yanmurzin had 3 wives, and Bikei was the child from his second wife. The sister from his first marriage was matched in childhood, but she died. So not to return anything, the first wife talked her husband into returning Bikei's sister in lieu of bride money, and the already received money was supposed to remain with them. Dal writes, a chicken from the second nest was given away, but its bride money remained in the first nest. De facto, Bikei's sister was married off as a slave, which was a shame, and the young man couldn't put up with this. So when he grew up, he demanded that the bride money be returned. And he also comes his planned marriage with Maulyana, who had been matched up with the stepbrother of the first wife. During one family rows, Bikei was killed. The elder brother, Jean Kuchuk, didn't let him drive away for even 5 steps. He attacked him from behind and used his heavy caulking hammer to crush his skull. Bikei started wobbling, fell down, lost consciousness, buried his both hands in the mane and didn't lift his face anymore. His unfaithful horse continued walking in its own stride. The rider was killed or finished off by his brothers, and the body was taken off the saddle. The story of Bikei and Maulyana is a classic story comparable with works of Shakespeare. A report was sent to Orenburg which said that Bikei had fallen down from the tripped horse and accidentally inflicted a deadly injury on himself with his own saber. Then, when the old Isengeldi made penance and, fearful of losing all of his sons, washed his hands in the blood and took the rap. By losing one son, I need to save the rest of them. I killed him, I bear his blood, that is why I'm responsible for this blood. Then he broke down in tears, buried his face in his hands, retreated and banned the killers from entering. All was done and dusted and nothing could be of any help. Chapter 3. Maulyana's Cry. Was Dal in Uralsk? Yes, multiple times. He stayed in this house on the second floor. He drank tea on the first floor because there were tea rooms here and also rooms with sofas, like a relaxation room.
Чайные комнаты были, диванные комнаты были, ну как эти комнаты отдыха. Спускался периодически.
So this was like a hotel attached to the house? Yes. This is the house where Maulyana came straight after her husband's death and asked to talk with the most senior authorities. This was a very unusual and very bold move for a Kazakh woman. According to the levirate customs, she had to become a wife of the killer and his fourth spouse. The ataman at that time was Baradin. This is his portrait on the wall, and he walked the heartbroken beauty to Orenburg to the military governor. She walked into the hall boldly and magnificently and amazed everyone sitting there with her poise, beauty, her footsteps and her unexpected appearance. I came, she continued calmly and firmly, to stab with my own hands and by your senior permission to kill Jan Kuchuk, my husband's murderer. She repeated this request straightforwardly and insistently that it was very hard to straighten her up and convince her to refuse to proceed with these endeavors. The Orenburg authorities found themselves in a difficult situation. On the one hand, a criminal had to be punished. On the other hand, this was a family matter, and they were cautious not to make things worse. That is why when Bikei's father was punished for the crime he had committed, this punishment was in a way pretty pliant and didn't correspond to the tragedy that had unfolded.
Уступчивый характер, и не соответствовало, конечно, той доле, той степени трагедии, которая развернулась.
Bikei's father and brothers were not punished and Maulyana was taken to her father's village, but the young girl didn't live long. In 2 years she died from smallpox. She just didn't want to live. One of the witnesses of her demise said to Dal that she kept repeating Bikei's name in a state of delirium. In my hands there is a collection of poems called Maulyana's Cry over her husband. She used to sing them and she knew them by heart. It has some really good poems. The work reminds of a chaotic rhapsody and vividly depicts the bereavement, despair of the lonely woman. Perhaps I will translate them one day. It was a story both characteristic and not very typical of that distant epoch. This story turned the Europeans' view on the Kazakh steppe upside down. And also this is a story which celebrates a Kazakh woman who is defiant, freedom-loving, strong and gorgeous.